Good morning and welcome to the Making Connections Symposium, which is really a creative experiment that's led by myself, Alice Longley, and Linda Knight in Melbourne. This project started with Linda and my collaboration on a project that we were working on, Making Connections, which began during the pandemic. And we started working with Creative Studio, in particular with Kate Stevenson, who's an artist and digital designer, to develop ways of bringing people together across distance. It's amazing now to be able to work with Studio and continue this work and find out what the possibilities are. So with this Making Connections Symposium, initiated by the Mapping Future Imaginaries Network and Choreographic Research Aotearoa New Zealand, we were really focusing on artistic research and bringing together artists from different parts of the world to be able to share their artistic research in a really low carbon way that enabled creativity to be at the center of our practice. So alongside this set of live presentations, we also have our virtual exhibition. So you will have entered this space through the kind of portal that the site allows us to find. And so you can have a look at all the artistic works in your own time, and that will be open until Sunday, New Zealand time. Okay, so let us start with Wendy Steele's presentation. Wendy, can we bring you in?
Hey. Hi, Alice.
Yoda, Wendy, how's it going?
Yeah, really good. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. Welcome to the presentation and thank you very much for being here.
Well, thanks so much. Thank you.
Okay, well, shall we hand it over to you and then we'll have some discussion as your presentation finishes. I can't wait to hear your presentation.
Thanks so much. Thanks. This is
okay.
lovely.
Fantastic.
Great. Hola, everyone. It's really delightful to be with you all. It's Monday night in Barcelona. My name is Wendy, and I'm usually living in Naarm, Melbourne, on the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my sincere respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. But I'm currently on secondment at RMIT Europe in Barcelona, Catalonia, and with colleagues in communities looking at regenerative futures and planetary civics within the context of a climate emergency. My research is not as an artist, but as a researcher whose work sits at the nexus of the environmental humanities and social scientists. But I'm privileged at RMIT to work with some wonderful artists like Linda Knight and others, and really interested in how we engage with ideas as practice and as politics to address climate change. So tonight or today, depending on where you are, we're in conversation with Bruno Latour, looking at his sketching of a fictional planetarium. You can probably see a little of his illustrations that have been rendered behind me of 7 different possible worlds and planets that we might inhabit. And we'll have a bit of a discussion about this as we go. He describes this as being part of the new climactic regime. But I really welcome this opportunity to share and sort of engage with this as a collective. So in his work, Latour argues that humanity shifted from questions of ecology, that is nature remaining outside the social order, to questions of existential subsistence on threatened territory. So nature, he argues, is no longer outside us, but very much around us and under our feet, and the ground is shaking. So it's urgent, he says, that we shift our politics sideways and we define politics as what leads back towards Earth and not towards the global or the national. So belonging to a territory is the phenomena most in need of rethinking and careful redescription, he argues, and that learning new ways to connect, to inhabit the Earth is in fact our greatest challenge. So bringing us down to Earth is the task of our politics today. So I'm really interested in exploring together what Latour's sketching of ideas, and he does sketch, he has a number of different ways of imagining these sort of meta futures, if you like, what they might mean. imagined as a shared storytelling experience. I invite you to reflect and if you'd like to, respond through your own sketching about what this says or means to you or doesn't, whether this be in a written, visual, studio, or performative form. You're very welcome to make these notes and then post them on a Miro board that I have given the link to Linda, or write notes in the chat, and feel free to comment on them yourself when finished. But at the end of each of Latour's sketches that I'm going to highlight today, I'm just going to pause and just allow people in their own space and time to reflect on what the sketch says to you, because they're quite interesting, and they sort of they have different evocations, and they might have different references and frames for different people. So I'm using sketching in this context, as many of you do as well, as an always ambiguous way to explore new concepts, but also new ethical relationships that are so very necessary in these uncertain times, as lines of flight. So sketching as an ambiguous undertaking is where breakthroughs are tentative, where they're rough and unfinished and ever evolving. So it's a form of shared exploration of ideas and possibilities, and the diverse ways in which these can enhance understanding and connectivity in dark times. So I'm just going to share a couple of slides that I think might help bring this to light. Let me just see if I can present these to you. Okay. Here we go. Great. Excellent. So when Latour wrote this essay, which he titled Down to Earth Politics in the New Climactic Regime, it was published around the occasion, or it was published in response to the occasion of Donald Trump's election, which was on November 8th, 2016, as the US president, and America's subsequent withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord in 2017. So this was a direct response to those two specific events that he acknowledges in the introduction to this essay. And what he was trying to do was bring together three phenomena that commentators were highlighting separately, but weren't seeing the connections between. And these were the critiques of globalization, the explosion, as he describes it, of inequalities around the world, and the impacts of climate change in terms of the relations between human beings, the realpolitik, and the material conditions of lives. So the Paris Agreement in 2015 had made clear that if every nation was to pursue its development plans, there would be no planet that would be able to support these modern human ambitions. That in fact this would require several planets and not just the one. So Latour was trying to bring attention to the absence of a common world that we can share. And he was arguing that to understand this requires putting climate change right at the centre of geo and other politics. The notion of home soil, he argued, is changing. We are all in a process of migration towards territories that are yet to be rediscovered and reoccupied. And it struck me as I was, engaging with Linda and Alice in the preparation for this, that in 2024, as Trump contests another presidential election and the Earth overshoots its planetary boundaries in ways that we've never seen before, that it's timely to revisit Latour's call for climate-centred, deep reconnection. The anguish across diverse communities, human and non-human, runs as deep as the very ground, and the earth beneath our feet seems to be slipping away. So the first sketch to offer you, and that Latour presents, is how we position ourselves within what seems to be two very contradictory moments. At one end, or one level, the claiming of ownership and attaching ourselves to land, but also, on the other, having access to a global world. And it's with this tension that Latour starts mapping some of these connections, which he argues radically complicates the process of actually ever being able to land somewhere. So he talks about the great transformations, accelerations of industrialization, urbanization, and occupation that have defined a horizon, and that you may see as either sinister or radiant, depending on your perspective, that gives meaning to modernist progress. But it was, Latour describes, a history that attests a brutal vision of linear progress, a brutal vision that provided, on the one hand, a fairly clear direction, but in a very particular direction, a powerful economic growth direction, the growth model that we're all oh so familiar with. And I just invite you to take a few moments just to really kind of look at what he was trying to communicate through this sketch of, the global of modernization. I mean, for me, what really strikes me when I look at it is one, the kind of very clear binary around this sort of great acceleration or progress towards growth. But secondly, the way, we're heading fully towards the technological, and it seems that everything's pushing, as we're all so familiar with, towards that kind of science fiction model of the Death Star, as if that's the sort of final endpoint of where we're going to add, or perhaps a satellite or other artificial construction out in space. So far, far away from the earthly terrain that we seem to be leaving behind. But these may just be my reflections, and I think if you feel like it, please take a few moments to sort of jot down any notes or scribblings that sketches of your own that these images might evoke as we go through each one. So to build on this, Latour argues that the local and the global are two poles of the modernization process. So he imagines that both these poles, in their best and worst guises, demonstrate that both are complicit in the current climate emergency. So the push for the global goes beyond conventional politics, and it also goes beyond what constitutes progressive and reactionary pushes from both the left and the right, because both the left and the right have pushed for both the global and the local, but in different ways. So the globalizing of the economy has always been pushed hardest by the right and resisted traditionally by the left, although this has been blurred in the last 50 years. Whereas the liberation of morals has been pushed as a globalizing agenda by the left and subsequently resisted predominantly by the right. And yet, within these tensions, people were able to find some common ground. So historically, in the history of modernism, despite these differences, common ground was found because everyone was on the same vector, Latour argues. So there was a single, fairly linear direction, and that was what derived the tension between these two poles of the local and global in the quest to be modern. The local in this context is not to be confused with Indigenous and First Nations ancestral knowledge systems, or custodianship. The local here does not refer to this very important agenda, but rather to the idea of the local being a nation state that is bordered and bounded as sovereign. So he's arguing about the local being this tension between nation states and a globalized modernity. And this has largely come about, this kind of local, through the colonization and reinvention of territories as the dynamic of a polarizing frontier of modernization, to get ahead, to participate in development, to profit from the world. The quest to become more global and its counter-response, the push, therefore, to become more local. But what happens when these poles of attraction become a counterforce pushing away from each other? Where does that leave people when there is a confused feeling that perhaps the push towards globalization wasn't resulting in the benefits for everyone that it had promised, that in fact very few will profit from this quest to be global? But yet the local of tradition, of protection, of identity, of certainty within national or ethnic borders is no longer certain either. And so this acts as a powerful counterforce against this. So caught between these two poles of the local nation state and the global, the front line of modernization becomes more akin to a scar line, or riffing off the Red Hot Chili Peppers, a scar tissue that I wish you saw. Sarcastic Mr. Know-It-All, soft-spoken with a broken jaw, step outside but not to brawl, I'll make it to the moon if I have to crawl, yeah. I mean, Latour uses the metaphor of the bird's eye view, riffing off the idea of an aeroplane that has taken off to the global, but the pilot says they cannot land. And so they have to turn around without landing at the destination of the sort of utopian global. So they turn around to head back to the local, only to find that this has now become inaccessible as well in this tension between the local and global. And it's here in this confusion and uncertainty that a third pole of attraction emerges, Latour argues, to disrupt this kind of linear trajectory. But this is where Latour argues that we find ourselves too disorientated to locate a position on the conventional modernist axis from old to new, and yet incapable of really grasping or understanding what other options are there for us. I mean, I find when I look at this diagram and I think about what he was trying to explore here, I find it quite powerful. I find it, the ways in which this sort of tension, the pulling apart, and yet the inability to reach either well, and the ways in which these two dimensions degrade each other really gets me thinking about what other alternatives and options there are, and yet why people feel so very much confused. I mean, even working in the university with calls for a radical politics, I still see that the growth model is the powerful attractor, and yet there's the tensions of being pulled back to the local context as well. And somehow we get stuck very much in the middle. So it's within this state of disequilibrium, if you like, and confusion that Trumpism ushered in a fourth pole. So Latour, coming from the context of writing about Trump's ascent as president in 2016, argued that he very shrewdly established a radical movement based on the systematic denial of climate change, of its existence, promoting simultaneously a headlong rush to maximum profit while abandoning the rest of the world, and in doing so, ushering in a retreat to national and ethnic categories in the midst of an increasing global and mobile world. So this idea of make America great again, but behind a fortress wall that serves as a rejection of the very world it claims to both protect and inhabit. And of course, this isn't just the US. I mean, countries like the UK and Australia have ruthlessly promoted and often imposed globalization across the world, courting skilled immigration whilst at the same time suppressing in brutal ways First Nations people. There's also been the way in which borders have been closed to refugees, even climate refugees. And this is like, very resonant of the medieval castle on the hill where the moat bridge gets pulled up at the sign of any danger. And we wonder if this is the kind of world that we wish to inhabit. So at the same time that most of these countries interfere across their borders, but refuse aid to those whose lives and livelihoods are being disrupted and displaced as a result. So this is a different kind of schematic. It's a different sketch to the ones we've seen before. It builds on but extends it, because instead of the advance towards globalization and or the retreat towards the nation state of the modernist linear poles, these poles are now conflated together. Forward, everything. Backward, everything. But rather than taking geopolitical crises seriously, this is what Latour describes as a politics with no object. Trumpism as having no substance, politics that are quite literally out of this world. And when I see this, it really, this frightens me, actually. I feel concerned and anxious in these times. And it feels to me that there there is a truth here, that somehow the discontent and the anxiety has been captured by this, push towards an out of world type of politics that is lacking in substance and ethics, and is taking us into some terribly dangerous directions. And so, it makes me feel a little happier when I see that he's started to explore other ways that we might start to understand some of the possibilities of possible worlds from this meta frame. So this final sketch is about metamorphosis. It's about the ways in which we need to find a place to land, a way home, common ground, as Latour describes it, how we come back to Earth. And he argues that one way of orientating this is by taking the increasingly endangered status of the formerly more or less stable relations of the Earth with humans much more seriously. So under the ground of private property, of land grabs, of the exploitation of territories, another ground, another soil, the Earth itself is moving, quaking, stirring. We're realizing it is alive. We, as part of it, are part of this aliveness. So this constitutes a complete reorientation of politics, he argues, around the terrestrial as a new political actor in and of itself. So how are we to land and emplace ourselves to dwell well if the territory we claim to occupy, this is the modernists, the Earth itself has begun to fight back? How do we occupy land as modernists that is itself occupying us? So these moderns that are drifting back to Earth, to land, to country, but this is not terra incognito or terra nullius as First Nations and Indigenous communities well know. This is ancient land that has been populated from millennia. But nor are we in pre-colonization times. The ground has shifted and the context is new for everyone, despite the wisest of traditional knowledge systems. Because in the Anthropocene, there are not small fluctuations in climate. Our hubris, our arrogance from a Western progressive growth perspective has instead resulted in an upheaval that is mobilizing the Earth system itself in ways that have never been seen in history. So Latour argues that humans have always modified their environment to some degree, whether that be from sustainment and a more sustainable perspective in harmony, or one of distraction, extraction, genocide, and ecocide. But what we're seeing now is that the Earth itself is coming to centre stage, fundamentally challenging the modernist script and suggesting alternate landings or even perhaps endings of certain types of lifestyles and life forms. And within the Australian context, with the highest rate of species extinction in recent times, this is not something to be taken lightly. So no society, human societies, had to deal with the unstable Earth system that we see reflected in the climate emergency. This is new territory, remaking a shared history. Latour calls this to modernise or ecologise, but the choice is, he argues, what to do. And I have no doubt that the group that are here, or that may, our colleagues and other people that we engage with, are thinking about this sort of tension in very different ways and different forms, but as a provocation, as a way of sketching the meta ideas that are seeing the sort of old, tension between the local and the global needing to come back to Earth. I think this is quite powerful, and I think there's a lot that could be provoked and prompted from thinking this through. So the last slide is that as part of regenerative futures, for me, regenerative futures are really important because they embed living systems at their very core, and they embed living systems and the ways in which communities have engaged thoughtfully and ethically with living systems at the very core of transitions. So as part of creating regenerative futures, it's going to require all kinds of different practices, negotiations, and diplomacy to orient towards, if one agrees with this, the terrestrial. And maybe this means drawing on those other poles and trying to bring people towards, as potential allies towards what it means to belong to country, to land, to earth. So the terrestrial from Latour's side is bound to earth, and it's a way of worlding beyond borders. And this will require unprecedented planetary scale civics in ways that we've not seen before, transversal understandings of pluralistic ways of knowing, different knowledge systems brought together to come to bear on these challenges that we face. So Latour argues that in the horizon of the global, there is no future Earth, but that a retreat to the local is shrunken and narrow to accommodate the multiplicity of beings that belong to the broader terrestrial world, Earth, planet that we are part of. So we can't be moderns anymore. We know that this future is doomed, but can we be terrestrials, or is there some other possible future that we should be exploring? For Latour, he's a radical terrestrial, or was before he passed away, but his ideas live on, so one might think in that sense. So, to find a common orientation, Latour argues we need to come back down to earth. We have to land somewhere, but it can't be too confined without recognizing the interplay of planetary commons, of waters, of rivers, of oceans, of air, of space that extend far beyond our perhaps immediate borders and boundaries. So we have to learn, how do we get our bearings, how to orient ourselves in ways that are different to how humanity has operated before. Key to this is the identification of migration without nations, climate, erosion, pollution, habitat destruction, resource depletion, but also things like whale migratory lines or the ways that birds and animals move. These are not stemmed or locked into artificial legal borders. So how do we map a new position as part of our new climate landscape? How do we understand better what's at stake and for whom, and how and where is this being redefined? And this is why Latour argues that it's important, urgent, to move the dial to what leads modernness back towards Earth and not towards the global or the national. So belonging to Earth as a collective is what needs most rethinking and reimagining, learning different ways to care and dwell well together, to share and build bridges across different knowledge systems and different ancestral and sacred ways of doing things. And I'll finish on a quote from Latour, who says, how can we reweave edges, envelopes, protections? How can we find new footings while simultaneously taking into account the end of globalization, the scope and scale of climate migration, and the limits that are placed now on the sovereignty of nation states in this climate emergency? And what can we do to creatively make the connections that are needed for this radical new politics that takes us collectively back to Earth and makes those connections much, much clearer as a radical new politics? So I'll leave it there. And again, the invitation is to see how and what you think of these ideas. There's a Miro board which we'll send the link around to, and hopefully Linda might make available on Mapping Future Imaginaries website. Some grist for the mill. And please feel free to email me on wendy.steele@rmit.edu.au if there's anything specific that you would like to share or take up with me. I'd love to be in conversation with you. So thank you. Thanks.
Here I am. Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much. I've just been sitting, drawing and scribbling alongside your presentation. I just enjoyed thinking so much around the scale of the world. And, hearing you talking about these really epic scales of the planetary, beyond the global, to think about ecologies and systems and materialities and lines of movement of of creatures beyond our own and ourselves in relationship to those creatures.
I'd love to see what you've been sketching. I really hope you upload some on the oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, so beautiful. So beautiful. Oh.
Trying to get it.
Yeah.
And some questions here. I've been thinking about artist friendship, and I was just thinking about this situation that we find ourselves in, that you're in Barcelona and you're in my yesterday and I'm in your tomorrow. And I always like to think about these kind of theoretical, kind of abstract provocations in terms of the granularity of here and now, you know, the moment. And I was just wondering about scribbling and drawing for you. Like, how do you find scribbling and drawing, which you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, as a way to take us into that kind of let's use some big jargony words, that transversal pluriverse of experience to do. I always talk with my students about the concept of just a little bit more than nothing, because I think it's so easy to be suspended, like in the face of the level of ecocide that's sort of happening and the level of politics. Like here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we don't have any control over whether Trump is in or out, you know, and reading about, you know, Trump and Putin this morning in The Guardian, and just thinking about, you know, these things are so far out of our control. And the things that are within our control are so just a little bit, like they're just pretty much nothing. But I think with my students about just a little bit more than nothing is something. And a collective of somethings is can be surprisingly activating. And then activation can open up pathways and those kind of, I just love the idea that we're sort of doing the idea of the pluriverse through the kind of affordances of the ... site, and that Kate Stevenson, who's here somewhere in the ether from New York, kind of attending to the technical affordances that allow me to be speaking to you right now.
Yeah.
You know, Kate has created a way for us to connect in this very low carbon way. Yeah. So I was just wondering about this kind of scribbling and drawing in the immediate, what's available, what do we do to be able to get there?
But I first of all, thank you. I love the way you express, and you know, the sort of poetry of the way we see the sketch and then the ideas, and then it comes down. I really feel that ideas are important practices, and I think there's sort of been a push away from, you know, and probably for good reason, that, you know, that isolating theory is something that's not needed anymore. But I think, you know, like any practices, some are useful and some are quite frankly, you know, unethical, useless, unneeded, and it's the same with ideas. But you know, we're testing out and sharing and bridging, and I think that the building of progressive ethical alliances, you know, at heart, does recognise the livingness of things is really a key part of that. So I think it's the reorientation of what matters, what counts, who can be included. So I think, I mean, I see some really vital signs about that, and I think that's, you know, in different communities might call this a regenerative futures agenda. You know, the entanglements of livingness of which humans are but a part, the need to engage with, you know, particularly Indigenous and First Nations knowledges from which we have so much to learn about those, you know, respectful and ethical entanglements. But other colleagues who are working in the area of planetary civics, you know, really thinking about, you know, for planetary commons, you know, how do we share and protect that, and you know, but not in a sort of patronisingly way? Like what is the new radical politics that weaves its way around that? And all around us, we've got, you know, some signs that we don't have that much time. So I just think, I think in the interplay, most of my work has actually been at the local scale, but I'm increasingly drawn to feeling that the interplay and the entanglement is not just across horizontally or even, you know, within nation state levels, but very much about how we genuinely try and make sense of, you know, of our historical context. And I think, you know, like it or love it, conversations with Latour are not the end point or the final say, but they're part of the conversation that we can have that might help prompt us, you know, as are, you know, the offerings from someone like Anna Polini, as are the offerings from, you know, from so many wonderful artists that are about to present as part of this third series. So yeah,
we're about to have a little panel in
Yeah.
Kate from New York and Macarena from Santiago, Chile,
Yes.
and Joanna and myself here from Tamaki in Auckland. And just this idea of I think it's really wonderful to have the provocations from your presentation to sort of ground us and earth us, and to think about these. I just written down these words about, you know, the unprecedented, about transversal connections, about different kinds of knowledge systems, about pluriverses, about belonging to a broader earth. So I we'll really take these ideas as prompts to in our next conversation. Hey, I was wondering, did you go to Bruno Latour's talk in Melbourne at PSI?
I did not. No,
because I was wondering if I was brushing shoulders with you there when you were here in
I'm sure we are in some sense.
Yeah.
I'm sure we are in some sense.
Kind of like that sense of entanglement.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you thanks so much for being part of this, and obviously, you know, love to hear the bits that jar, that don't resonate, that, you know, that these are, you know, the silences, the absences, the taken for granted knowledges that we, you know, I just think there's so much to that we can all engage with here.
Yeah. As I grow as an academic, the longer that I'm sort of in the work, the more that I feel that the tensions are so vital, you know, and that the things that are difficult and awkward and hard to hold, and the moments that the moments of tension have so much energy and life to them.
Yeah.
So it's always so yeah, thank you for that reminder to be able to lean into things that are difficult, because I think learning to do that is a big part of this kind of politics, isn't it?
I think so too. Yeah.
Well, lovely to have you. Thank you so much for being part of the conference, Wendy, and all the best. Have a great rest coming to the end of the day in Barcelona.
I'm looking forward to the other, you know, the other parts of this program that are coming up. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for launching us. Have a great night.
Bye-bye. Bye.